So good evening, everyone. So we will primarily be looking at the Roman period today. So we stop with how the Hasmonean dynasty, which was a very started as a very reformative act against the heinous rule of how the pagan cultures and how the temple was being defiled, and all these matters were coming into the faith. And when God's men and women wanted to fight against it, they rose up and they went against them. And we know how the entire Maccabees family was one of the important figures, and how they stood to be important aspects, and how the entire dynasty came from their family itself. We also understand that this account of Hasmonean period is primarily from the book of Maccabees. Now, in our Bibles, we do not, in Protestant Bibles, we do not have these books. However, it is there in the Catholic Bible. Catholic Bible has the account of Maccabees, and in those, it is these historical accounts mentioned. We will primarily deal with these writings next week. In the coming weeks, we will look at the fifth session that is going to be 2 weeks from now. We will look at the different sects that arise from all these movements. I think that is going to be an interesting and a very essential aspect of our learning. And also, we will look at the apocryphal and pseudonymous writings. And the sixth week, that will be the last week of our study on the intertestamental period before we move on to the Gospels, where we will look at the canonization. And it's a very important matter because we'll be able to recognize, even though some of these, like how Maccabees, we take it to be very historically relevant material, why we don't consider it to be scripture. And even when there are matters like Septuagint, who has a lot of these writing, which many of us use, why do we still do not consider many of this to be inspired, is something that we will be looking at. So that's how this entire session is going to go, 6 weeks, where we will be looking at the intertestamental period, and then we'll be entering into the gospel. So as I said, this is where the entire power struggle came between Hyrcanus and in the Hasmonean range, and we understand how this resulted in a big issue within them, and how the Roman government interfered among them, and how they appointed Pompey is the major figure, how they appointed them to come into their territory, and how they started ruling over them by making Hyrcanus II as the priest, and so on. We also know that the general Aristobulus too was taken as a prisoner to Rome, and how only one of his son, which is Antigonus, who is going to play a significant role in a little later stage when we look at the Roman Empire, he is going to come back and he's going to defeat, in fact, the Herod and all at that point of time. So the first period in the Roman Empire, it was not an easy period. It was a period of struggle itself. So here we see the major reason of the struggle is what I mentioned about the Antigonus, who comes back and who is going to try to take control of their power again and again, bring back the Hasmonean dynasty over there. So here we see that how Hyrcanus II and Antipater II were given the control of the of Judea by the Rome itself. And this was from 63 BC all the way till 40 BC. Now, the reason what happened over there is so in 63 BC is when Pompey entered Jerusalem, and so when that was happening, Hyrcanus II was reinitiated as the high priest, and he was made accountable to Rome. Now, we do not in the as we've been looking at how this office of high priest is slowly becoming a political office, right? How it is not anymore handling just the spiritual matters, but a lot of political matters were also going through the high priest, and decision making was also under them. Now, they were also accountable to Rome in that matter. Now, Hyrcanus was merely a puppet ruler. He did not have the title of a king. So in Judea, he was primarily under Antipater II. Now, Antipater II comes from the Edomite. I think we'll come to that in some time. He comes from the Edomite family, and we see that he was a powerful Edomian ruler. And Judea, Samaria, Perea, Galilee, and all of these were given under them. So he was the sole ruler. He was a sole controller, even as Hyrcanus was just acting as a puppet ruler. Just to please him, he was kept in control. Now, one thing important is here, Antipater had 4 sons, Faisal, Herod the Great, who's going to become a very significant person, especially when we look at the Bible, New Testament, the Gospels, Joseph, and Pheroras. So these are the 4 sons of Herod. So the Greek cities in the region of Decapolis, which is the 10 independent cities, were given. So Pompey had taken control of these cities, and they were given independence, in fact. However, they took many Jews as slaves to Rome. Now, because they took many Jews as slaves to Rome, what happened is we see how the Jewish community in Rome started rising. And we see how later many of them were awarded the Roman citizenship. Right, and we know the classic example of Paul, right, who was a citizen of Rome, but being a strong Hebrew, a Pharisee, he had the citizenship of Rome, which a lot of people were confused on how can he be a citizen of Rome in itself. And if you remember, some of you were part of the Pauline missionary journeys we did in 2020. And over there, we looked at a good background of Paul, where we identified how one can become the citizen of Rome. And I hope we can again do that when we look at the Pauline writings in the series. So here, until now, it was Pompey who was in the major control. But in 48 BC is when the most common person whom we all know, the Julius Caesar, comes into the picture, and he marches against Pompey, and because he was a rival, so until then, we see how both Hyrcanus and Antipater, their allegiance was completely to Pompey, right? But then when Julius Caesar entered into the picture, this allegiance shifted from Pompey to Caesar. So this complete overturn took up where their entire allegiance shifted over there from Pompey to Caesar. And because of that, Caesar defeated, he marched against Pompey and defeated them, and took the power of the empire. And because of that, we see how Caesar awarded the Roman citizenship to Antipater, who's an Edomite. He was given the Roman citizenship, and also he was appointed as the procurator of Judea. Now, one of my last slides for today is the Roman government. How did the government of in the Roman setting work? It's a lot of political analysis, but we'll just look at 4 major things, especially relating to the New Testament as such. So he was one of the procurator, or we call him a prefect, that was appointed as the by the Rome, by Caesar, in fact. So we also see Hyrcanus becoming the ethnarch, right? Another title, another name. So ethnarch is like a ruler of a person, meaning a native ruler. Right, somebody who's ruling the native person, who knows the native setting, and he was given the permission to rule over the native land. So here we see how in later Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, and we see how the entire shift happens. Yeah. So, and then Phalasel, the son of Antipater, was appointed as the governor of Judea and Perea, and his son Herod as the governor of Galilee. So, here itself, we saw some of these important terms that came in as a political important terms in the government of or in the setting of Roman government. Now, Mark Antony, again, a very famous historical figure, which all of you are quite familiar with. So, Mark Antony made Antipater's son, Phalasel and Herod, as joint tetrarchs, as rulers of part of Palestine, and he and made Hyrcanus as the high priest in Jerusalem itself. So, you see how the political overturns is happening again, and Romans are taking control through local rulership as well as by their own dictatorship, how they are taking in their power in various forms. Now, for the last time, we are going to see the Hasmonean rule again. Now, as we looked at it, Antigonus, who escaped at that point of time, was able to come back. So he was the son of Aristobulus too, and he was able to come back into the power, and he appointed himself as the priest king. Now, what happened is he got the control, or he got the alliance of the Parthians from the east. By using that, he went against the existing rulers, and he was able to conquer the Palestine in 40 BC. Now, this was for a very short period of time. However, he was the so-called last person from the Hasmonean family who became and who had this title of the priest and the king together, being handled by one person. Now, at this point of time, we see how because Antigonus was a strong Hasmonean, so he wanted to get rid of all the rivals out of the dynasty. So what he did was he killed. We're not sure how. Some say it was poisoned, or some even say they committed suicide. So Fasael was taken out of the picture. Now, the next person who was going to be in danger was Herod. And Herod, being a smart man himself, made his family secure in a fortress called as Fortress of Masada. And he fled to Rome, because he knew Rome will always welcome him because of the alliance that he had shown towards Rome. So he had given that picture, and he fled all the way to Rome, keeping his family safe in the fortress of Masada. Now, so Antiochus again renewed the Hasmonean rule, and also brought in various Hasmonean, the way that they were handling with the law and all of those things slowly into the picture. However, we see that at this point of time, at this point of time, Herod obtained the support of Mark Antony and Octavian and the Senate. So even though here Antigonus have taken the control of Judea by himself and made himself as the priest king, however, in Rome, Herod was made as the king. He was appointed as the king in 40 BC itself. They were appointed as the king. So that was by the Roman government, where they appointed Mark Antony, Octavian, and so on, appointed him as the king. So you can see like two kings at parallel, one in the province itself from the Hasmonean dynasty trying to rule. And however, Herod was officially, as per the Roman account, he would be the king over there. However, he was not able to gain the control until 37 BC, when when Herod had to return and he conquered with the help of the Romans. He had conquered them, and Jerusalem was completely captured. And we see Antigonus, because he was a threat to them. So Herod had requested, and with Mark Antony's permission, we see how the last of the Hasmonean king was beheaded, and he was killed at this point of time. So when we look at this period, especially the Hasmonean period, there are some particular mandatory aspect that we need to look at, especially the key developments that happened at this point of time, which stands to be quite important. The first thing is how, even as the Roman Empire started their rule with Judea and the Palestine as a whole, we see how Judaism still remained as a legal religion. So Rome had practiced a sort of technique or a way of rule where they did not really interfere into the religious life of the people. Now they did, however, it was not a very mandated aspect. Yes, they had to do certain things because they were, especially with matters like tax. And later, much later, came the aspect of emperor rule, emperor worship, and so on. At that point of time, there were even stronger allegiance and stronger devotion that the people needed to have towards towards Rome. But until then, Judaism remained as a legal religion, and they were allowed to carry out their practices and cultural life and so on. So because of that, the various internal affairs of the religion, right, the internal affairs of the religion were kind of with them itself. So it did not go out of their hand. So because they were handling it by themselves, they were able to carry out the various festivals. Even the New Testament, right, the Gospels, when we read, they were under the Roman Empire, but we see how in the Passover, people from all across the places, Hellenized Jews were all coming back into Jerusalem to worship. We see that picture in John chapter 10. We see how the festival of light was practiced and everybody coming together. So there was a lot of freedom in that way until a point of time to carry out all these practices, and they had privileges as people. Now, external matters or matters that were relating to the administrational aspect were mostly handled by rulers who were controlled by Rome. These were smart leaders who were primarily rulers who knew the Jews very well, probably knew their language very well, knew the Torah well. However, they also were able to handle, they were also able to account to the Roman government of what was happening and so on. So in an overall way, when we look at this initial phase, when the Roman Empire and the Hasmonean dynasty, all these taking over, we see how Jews really enjoyed various legal, social, and religious freedom under the Roman government. Now, this is all the way, right? We see how even in the Gospels, in the Gospel of John and all, when Christians arise, now there is something important that when we try to look through the Gospels, we're not sure when is the category of Jews and Christians being splitted up. It's still an unclear matter. People still debate about it and so on. However, we clearly see this picture especially in the Gospel of John. In chapter 9, we see the idea of putting out of the synagogue, where if you are becoming a Christian, you are put out of the synagogue. So that sort of a punishment the Jews were enforcing upon the Christians, saying that Christians are not part of the Jewish system and they have to be punished and so on. So we see how the Jewish government supported those decisions. In fact, the very crucifixion itself, right, the act was supported by the Roman government, and we see how Pilate and all playing an important part in it. So for favoring the Jews, the Roman government used to do certain things, and Roman people were peace-loving people. Right, much later, they even introduced Pax Romana, where they wanted to maintain peace with everybody. However, they had their own struggles, and it was not an easy-going time, especially when we come into each of the Caesars, which we will be looking after some time. We see how there were serious issues that Jews and also the followers of Jesus had faced at that point of time. Let's look at Herod at this point of time. So Herod is a very a very smart person, in fact, and has done so much for the Jewish people, yet never was truly loved or was truly adored by the Jewish people. So, as I said, he was a close friend of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And what happened is there was this issue with Mark Antony and Octavian. And Herod was completely in the allegiance of Mark Antony. Whereas once Mark Antony was defeated in 31 BCE, and we see he and Cleopatra committing suicide, we see how this Herod, who is a shrewd in his own ways, shifts his allegiance to Octavian, right? And Octavian is the one who later becomes Augustus, or what we call as the Julio Claudian dynasty starts from them. This is a little bit of history, and I'm sure if we've been a little active in our schools, we might have come across most of these names. But it is interesting to know how all of this relates to the Bible also. So when coming to the Palestine, so he was fond of the Roman Empire. Herod had a lot of support from the Roman government itself. So it is with the full support of the Roman government that he recaptured Jerusalem and Palestine and became the king. And also, he beheaded Antigonus because he knew that he would have definitely been a threat. And in fact, Herod always feared Hasmoneans. Now we'll see that Herod married a Hasmonean because he wanted to keep the allegiance, sort of wanted to get that favor from the local people. However, he turned out against his own family, right? We will see that. So he became a friend of Rome, as well as he tried to become a person who is of a great benefit to the local people, right? So in many ways, his rule benefited the Palestine in many ways. Now, Augustus reinstated Herod as the king of Judea, as well as Samaria, various parts of North and Galilee, and so on. Right, and he remained as a faithful spy or a faithful man under Augustus until he died in 4th BC. So he married Mariam. Right? Mariam is part of the Hasmonean dynasty. Now he married her so that he could get the allegiance and he can get the love of the people, the local people. However, they never really liked him. Especially one of the major reasons why they never liked him is because he appointed a non-Hasmonean called Hananiel as the high priest. He was a Babylonian Jew, right? And he made him as the high priest. Now his mother-in-law, Alexandra, who is the mother of Mariam. So all of these people. So give me a second. So can you hear me? Is it disconnected?
We can hear you. It's on.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I think there was some issue. I turned off a switch and yeah. So we see how Mariam's mother, who's Alexandra, had issue with Herod because of the sort of rule that he was having, especially for placing Hananiel at the center. So what she had in mind was to place, because she was from the Hasmonean period, she wanted to place one of their family lines, Aristobulus III, as their next high priest. And because of this, we see how they started having some twist and turn against their own family, which made Herod to be suspicious of his own family and made him kill his mother-in-law, which later made him kill his own wife, Mariam, and later which is in around 7 BCE, we see he even killed his two sons, right? Because he was so afraid that the Hasmonean dynasty would come back into the power and would harm him. So with all this fear, we see how he kills the entire dynasty, and this kind of made a lot of negative impact about him in the local setting. Now, so that's mainly about his understanding or the way that he was out there. However, he always wanted to support the Jewish people, whereas he never really got the support from the Jewish people, especially from the Pharisees and all were very active at this point of time. So he never got the support of the local people that he was looking for, right? He never succeeded in gaining an acceptance from the Jewish people in spite of the great things that he had really done for them. In fact, he supported the Jewish religion, and he even gave a lot of Jewish freedom. And even we are going to look at the next slide of mine is going to be the building projects that he had, right? He had a lot of great building projects for the land, which greatly benefited, including the temple. However, they never really had any sort of love to Herod. They always really did not like him, but it was a period of good peace and prosperity, right? So this is both sects, neither Pharisees nor the Sadducees. None of them really accepted his authority, mainly because of the high priestly matter that came at this point of time. This was a particular period of great prosperity in the land, especially with a lot of commercial matters. This was a lot of advantage that came into the people, right? As I said before, he was an Edomite who comes from the descendants of Esau, and also he completely relied on the Roman. Whatever happened, he was always engaged with the Roman government. Now, here, some of the things that he had done for them, extensive building projects, I'll look at that in the next slide. He had done great things by doing a lot of building projects and forts and all in the land, which nobody before him ever planned of doing. And also the temple, again, a significant matter. And because of the because of his tie-up with the Roman government, he had a good way of bringing the matters of the Jewish concerns to the Roman government, and to get those matters resolved, he was able to do most of those things in a well-fashioned manner. So that was some of the things that came as an advantage for him. So in that way, when we look at it, he gave emphasis to the Greco-Roman culture and the so-called all these changes that have happened with the dynasties coming into being. However, he also gave importance to the Jewish culture and religion. Now, when you read about Herod the Great, right, have this in mind and read it, and you will be able to be fascinated to know how the Bible describes him and so on. And also, not all the Herods are the same, which we will again come in some time. So some of the building projects, he rebuilt Samaria, the entire Samaria. He rebuilt it and gave it the name Sebaste. So he became like a dedication to Augustus, where he did that in honor of Augustus, and he built a completely new city where he was honoring Augustus over there. Now, there were also various other cities that he had rebuilt and had restored, and also dedicated them to Augustus over there. The second one is the fortress of Masada. Now, this is where he held his family and safeguarded them from the attacks that had come against him from Antigonus. So here we see how, and this is a mastery. I mean, the way that this was constructed, and this was like an escape measure, right? We see how this would have prevented them from attacks from the east. Anywhere from the east they were coming, this would have prevented them over there. Now, also, we see the Jerusalem temple, right? Now, Jerusalem second temple was built by, as we know, it was Nehemiah, Ezra, and all who took up the mandate to rebuild the second temple after they came back from the exile, right? And we see that in the book of Ezra, Nehemiah, and so on. However, the old temple compared to the Solomon's temple, it was not a rich in its appearance. However, when Herod took it up, he had enlarged the Jerusalem temple, and he started building this in 20 BC. And accounts say that the temple projects went all the way until just 4 or 5 years before its destruction in 70 Common Era. So because of that, look at the time frame. He passed away. However, the project still went on, and there was this mastery of class. Again, just 5 or 6 years after it was completed, we know how it was again destroyed. However, the enlarged temple had its own various ways and its own different provinces and places for Gentiles, some places for women. It was beautifully looked upon and articulated at that point of time. And also the famous Wailing Wall, right, which is the only existing part of the temple that is there, that was part of the temple. He also built extensively in other cities and went ahead. He was an excellent architect in that way when we look at it. One another important is the tomb of the patriarchs. He dedicated and built a tomb for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this are the various things that we can see. There's a picture of the wall, or kotel as they call it, where people come and pray and pay their respect. And also if you look at it, the stones that are used, if you can see the stones that are used over there, it was genuinely a Herodian type of stones, the one that he used for his construction. And we see in Mark chapter 13, if you take Mark chapter 13 and read, Jesus' disciples asked Jesus, looking at these temples, sitting outside in the temple premises, looking at these stones, they were massive and they were beautiful and appearing to the eyes. And they asked Jesus, how many years and what craftsmanship has gone behind this act. And we see how Jesus, in his prophetical aspect, he says, all this is going to pass away and this is going to be destroyed. So that we can see how this all comes into its own play itself. Now, the downfall of Herod the Great happened all the way from 14 BC. It was mainly because he was married about 10 times, had many sons by this time, and also he had the resistance from the people. Now, one of the reasons why the resistance is one is the high priestly matter, we looked at it. The other is the heavy burden of taxation that was implemented upon the people. Now, why were tax collectors hated by the Jews? One of the reasons was this, they were a burden to see. And we see Matthew was a tax collector, or Levi was a tax collector, and Zacchaeus. Now, why all these people were looked down was because they were a real burden to the society. Now, this grew as a sort of offensive to the period, and we see how this all kind of brought separation from Herod and the people. Also, he was physically very getting weaker, and his health was deteriorating. So because of domestic complexity, resistance against him regarding taxation, because of enemies arising, and because of poor health, we see how he completely falls from his power. Looking at some of the key developments that came under him, economic prosperity for sure. We see how, because he was a skillful diplomat, to go into Roman government, speak for the Jews, come back to the Jews and speak for the Romans. So there was a lot of key improvements and developments and economic prosperity that happened because of him. Spread of Hellenism, because he was a close friend of the Jews, for the Romans. He had all various dedicated various places for the education of the Hellenistic understanding, and the way that he built up wherever it was. The Hellenism was increasing rapidly. And definitely Jerusalem temple to be one of the most important developments that came from his time. And he alienated himself from the religious elites. The Pharisees and the other people were not very fond of him, especially because of the family that he came from, and also because of his allegiance to the Romans that we see. Now, it was during this period of time, in Luke chapter 1, verse 5, in Matthew chapter 2, we see how it was during the time of Herod the Great that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, right? It was in around 5 BC that this probably would have happened. Now we look at all the house of Herod itself, and we'll see the different Herods that is mentioned in the New Testament, right? So Herod the Great, we had definitely looked at. He was the king of Judea, who was the major person behind the second temple, or the restoration and the enlargement of the second temple. And also the infancy narrative that we see is definitely about him. Now, the second is the sons of Herod. The first is Herod Archelaus, right? He was the ethnarch of Samaria and Judea and Idumea. Now, about him also we are able to see in Matthew 2:22, where we see the picture of the Archelaus. He was the king whom Joseph feared when he came back from Egypt with Mary and Jesus. So, we also see headquarters of the Roman government were established in various of these places, and how these sons of Herods were kind of ruling those at that point of time. Then was Herod Antipas, right? He was the tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and he was called as the Herod the Tetrarch and the fox, right? Now this might alarm us because of the Gospels, the number of mention about him in the Gospels, right? Because he marries his half brother Herod Philip's wife Herodias, and he ordered the death of John the Baptist, and was also involved in Jesus's trial. So you see the number of picture of Herod Antipas in the Bible, and especially in the Gospels, especially in the Synoptic Gospels, and also in Acts, right? In Acts 4 and Acts 13, we are able to see Antipas over there. Philip the Tetrarch, now know much of things about him, I believe. Philip received mainly the north and the east of the Sea of Galilee, and he was appointed as the Tetrarch. His wife was his grandniece Salome, the daughter of Herodias, who later became Antipas' wife. And most of his subjects were Gentile, and he was supposedly a well-liked person, and he is mentioned in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. And the other, the house of the Herod, the other important names are Herod Agrippa I, right? The client king of Judea, called as the King Herod or Herod, right? He was sent to Rome for education, and he became friends with Caligula, who is Roman emperor. And we see that he acquired the position and the property of Antipas. And later this was given to Emperor Claudius, right? So he, with Agrippa I, we see in sort of he had a good time with the Jews. He enjoyed a goodwill with the Jews, especially because of the freedom that probably he had given to the Pharisees to carry out certain rituals and various things. Also, it is probably with Agrippa I that they started having coins without an image on them, where Jews were always hesitant to have these coins. Why? Because they had the image of the Roman emperors behind them, and they never worshipped, or they never wanted to have any of these images over there. Now, because he minted coins without an image, this gave them a lot of the Jews a lot of respect to King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa. The second over here is Herod Agrippa II, right? And he was the tetrarch again, and he is described in Acts chapter 12, before whom Paul defended himself, right? The great speech that Paul makes over there is before him. And this account also that we are able to see in Acts chapter 23 and 25 and so on. A very powerful speech of Paul, in fact. Now I hope, especially in the last sessions, we couldn't bring much of New Testament text into it, but now it's all in New Testament, right? We are able to see the various people involved in the New Testament. Now, at least of 6 Herods, we looked at it, right? We saw Herod the Great, we saw Herod Archelaus, we saw Herod Antipas, we see Philip the Tetrarch, Herod Agrippa I, and Herod Agrippa II. We see at least this many Herods in the Bible. So when you hear the name Herod, probably what we should look at is the context and the background, and to see which Herod are they really talking about out there. Now, quickly, the Caesars during the New Testament period. This comes mainly, let's look onto it. So it's with the Augustus that this entire Julio-Claudian dynasty starts, and it goes with the first five Roman emperors are called to be the Julio-Claudian dynasty, starting with Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. So Augustus, who was Octavian, was the first Roman emperor who reigned from 27 BC and went on till CE 14. And he is called to be one of the most effective leaders in the human history. Right? And then came Tiberius Caesar. Now, all these are people who we can see in some ways. In Luke chapter 2, verse 1, we saw Augustus. In Luke 3:1, we see Tiberius Caesar, who is an adopted son and son-in-law of Augustus, and he came into power in CE 14, and he did not permit divine honors to be given. So he is one of the rulers who did not alienate himself to be a divine person, which almost every other person had done. Now, what we see is, however, he had associates, political associates, such as Sejanus, right? And Sejanus was very much against the Jews. He was anti-Semitic, right? And we see Pontius Pilate as one of the closest associates and appointees of Sejanus. So even though Tiberius Caesar did not take a divine position on himself, his appointment and his own ways of dealing with things, we see was against the Jews. Also, in Luke chapter 3, we see that picture where Jesus probably did the entire ministry at the point of time when Tiberius Caesar was on the power. The next person is Caligula Caesar, right? Now, Caligula was one of that person who appointed himself to be an incarnation of the Roman god Jupiter, right? Claimed himself to be the one to be worshipped. And we see how emperor worship and all was prominent starting from these periods, and how they were going to be, if they were not going to be worshipped, they were going to be killed, and so on. Then came Claudius Caesar. Now, Claudius Caesar was the major, a lot of things to talk about him, but the major thing is he was the father of Nero, and because his mother, Nero's mother, wanted him to be on the power, his wife, his fourth wife, who is, it's a lot of interesting story if you want to read about Claudius Caesar. His fourth wife, who's also his niece, right, Agrippina, because he know that if he's continuing in the power, Nero cannot come into the power. So she had poisoned him, and Claudius was killed. Now, next comes the person who's very significant in the New Testament period. Now, most of the thing, a lot of New Testament prophecies, a lot of them, especially in the book of Daniel and all, a lot of them are fulfilled in the Second Temple period, right? With especially with King Antiochus Epiphanes and all of that. With them, we see how a lot of prophecies are being fulfilled. Now, again, over here, a lot of matters that we look at here, we see how it is being fulfilled in Nero also. So Nero, leaving his personal or how he was and those details aside, as my time is short and we have some more stuff to be done for today, we see how that he had kind of left his rule to other people or close associates that were with him, like Seneca, who was a poet and a philosopher, and also Burrus, who was a financial expert. And the first half of this period of the Nero was supposedly a very peaceful period of time. And a lot of theologians, a lot of New Testament scholars suggest that Romans 13 was written at this point of time. Romans 13, as we all know it, it is the account where Paul is writing to the people of Rome, and in fact the larger church over there, to submit themselves to their government and to follow them, to pray for them, and all of these things. And probably this came from this point of time. However, as a person, Nero was a horrible person. He killed his own stepbrother, fearing that he would take his title, which is Britannicus, because Claudius had other wives and other children. So he killed Britannicus. And his own mother, Agrippina, because she was tired of the way that Nero was dealing with things. And later, he even killed his own wife because he liked he liked a friend's wife. So he killed his own wife, and later he killed that wife when she was pregnant, because of some issue that they had within themselves. So he was a quite difficult person to handle on a personal level. However, in a stage, right, in a more like a issue of bipolar issue, right, where in front of other people, in front of a crowd, in a stage, he was always the hero. He was a singer, he was a poet, he was an athlete. He always promoted games, and in fact, he was adored by the people because of the various the way that he appeared in front of the title, in front of the people. Now, the major incident of his life took place in 64 C, right? 64 C, when a terrible fire broke out in Rome. And this was a point of time when rumors started circulating that it was Nero who was behind it. But Nero took Christians as the scapegoat. Now, I'm sure that most of us know this. Christians as a scapegoat, and started persecuting Christians, started killing Christians, right? And hundreds of Christians were martyred in various cruel ways by throwing them to the lions, and all of these things happened at this point of time. And even Clement, right, the church father Clement and Eusebius and all suggest that it was at this point of time that Peter and Paul was killed or was persecuted at this point of time. Now, so this was a point when it was getting out of hand, because Nero murdered people who were in his family. He also murdered his political advisors, like, for example, his own friends, like Seneca, whom we looked at as a poet, and also people who were so close to him. Now, because of this, Jews started revolting against him. Now, this is an important matter. In CE 66, right, Jewish revolt broke out. And this went all the way later point of time, and we see how, because of the severe political issue that happened in the Rome, because of the way that Nero was ruling, he was deposed by the Senate, and he had to flee from Rome. And later, at just the age of 30, he committed suicide. And this ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Now, some more important names: Vespasian, right, who took up the power as soon as Nero was there. In fact, he Nero sent Vespasian to control the situation when the revolt was on. However, he couldn't hold on to much of the situation. That is when he transferred his power to his own son Titus, right? So Titus was again an important name coming to the New Testament history. Titus revolts, right? That they tried to destroy various parts of Rome, in fact. However, they also destroyed the Jerusalem temple. So CE 70, when Titus was in power, we see how there is the Jerusalem temple being destroyed, right? Titus, the son of Vespasian. Hope you will remember these names when we look at the Gospels later on. Finally, Domitian, right, who was Titus's brother, and he was a good civil servant. In fact, he was trying to do a lot of things. However, Domitian demanded to be called as the Lord and God, or as some coins that was found suggest, he was called as Domitius et Deus, right, where he was called himself as as God. And we see a lot of persecution, especially the book of Revelation, right? The apocalyptic writing of Revelation was at this point of time with a severe persecution that underwent as a result of Domitian's various acts, especially in the name of emperor worship. So this is the larger history. See, look, what I've done today is take the important aspect of Jewish history, which has Roman Empire as its major highlight. So these are the people, and these are the lot of larger people that we see. Now, this is Pontius Pilate, this is a inscription that has been found. It is written to the divine Augusti, this Tiberium. The next line says Pontius Pilate. The next line says prefect of Judea. The next line says has dedicated this. Not much clearer, but this is what it is written over there, as we can see it. So the Roman rule, as I said in the start, some of the important things that we need to understand. So the emperors that we looked at now, from Augustus all the way till Domitian, stood as the most important rulers, right? They were the head of the political, military, judicial, and religious setting. They were the heads. They were the primary leaders who controlled most of the matters at that point of time. However, because they were holding, in fact, I forgot to put up a map of the Roman Empire. It was a huge territory. It was a huge empire that they were ruling. So they had various people who were under them to rule at this point of time. However, this Roman Empire was a chief in power, right? He was the protector of the public order, and his authority was unlimited. Anything that he says can be done, unlimited. Sort of a position of a god itself is what they have done. So when coming to the Roman government, the entire aspect can be looked up as there is the centralization of the political authority, where everything is reported back to Rome, where the taxes that are collected have to come back. There are penalties, death penalty, and matters like that has to be consulted and have to happen with Rome. However, in matters relating to local religious and political affairs of a state, of a province, was given to the individual cities and the rulers that they had placed over there. So there was centralization, as well as there was allocation of the rule to people that we are able to see at this point of time. Now, there were senatorial provinces. Senatorial provinces were larger provinces like Asia as a whole, or Achaia as a whole, right? These were administered by proconsuls and who held the offices and so on. These were most likely people who are retired army generals and all of them who used to handle these positions. Then there were imperial provinces, who were newer territories, who used to be governed by these people that we see. Like, for example, Judea just came under them, how they were going to rule at that point of time. So for that is when they had governors, right? They had various Roman governors who used to rule over them, as well as they had prefects or procurators who were ruling over them. So in provinces, there were senatorial imperial rule that was happening, and in imperial provinces, we see how there are legate, or we see how there are prefects or procurators who are taking the position, right? And they all had lot of, they all had a particular number of soldiers with them. They all had various ways in which they had to do the taxation and so on. One of the most important Roman prefect that we know, especially from the Bible, is Pontius Pilate, who is probably from 26 to 36 CE. He was the Roman prefect. Now, you can just Google and find out the various other Roman prefects, but he was the most important one. Also, there were Roman procurators. Now, procurators were people who were in matters of financial as well as imperial governor of minor provinces. They were people who handled the various financial matters of the state, and were people who had essential control over the provinces, the minor provinces. And some of them in the New Testament that we can see in Acts chapter 5 verse 36 to 37, we see Theudas, right? We see him as one of the under Cuspius Fadus, right, 44 to 46 CE. And then in 52 to 60, we see Felix. Again, in Acts chapter 21, we see that account of Felix. And then we see Festus, right? Acts chapter 24. These are all mostly, especially Felix and Festus, it is connected to Paul in Acts 21 and Acts 24 that we are able to see. There were also independent client kingdoms. Now, at large, even though Judea had prefects, they had proconsuls, they had all of these things, procurators. However, Herod, who ruled Palestine under the Rome, was like a semi-independent client kingdom. So it was a mixture of all of this together that they kind of used to rule, that we are able to see. Now, coming to my last slide, and the time is almost up. So these are some of the ways that the Roman influences had happened, or the way in which the Roman influences had affected the political and the situation of this time. So there were cities of the empire were ranked according to the privileges. Now, there were colonies, there were towns, there were free cities. So because of that, now the reason I put it over here is because in Pauline missionary journeys and in the way that Paul traveled, at certain places he was able to freely do certain things. In certain places they were not allowed to do certain. It is all because of the bindings of the law, mainly under the Roman government, because in colonies, there might be certain freedoms that they have. So there used to be guidelines on how each of this used to happen, right? If they were a free city, there was no official privileges they were allowed, but they were given various internal affairs that they had to do. And Ephesus and Syria in Antioch of Syria were all part of this particular aspect of free cities. So cities were ranked accordingly, and the privileges differed in each of these places. Another important thing is Roman citizenship was a very prized possession. It was a very important and a prized possession that happened. It was not easily available. One cannot just simply get it. They are able to primarily possess it by hereditary right, or pay a huge amount, which is not easy for a normal man to pay and get it. One primary way in which the Roman government valued their citizens were by exempting from the most harmful punishment and forced labors. For example, one cannot crucify a Roman citizen. It's like against their law, and also cannot take him into a forced labor. All this were clearly stated in the law. Now, Roman laws contributed to the advance of the civilization, right? They had clearly dictated laws, which in many ways affected and benefited their clients and people who were under them. Now, in a negative way, there was a lot of religious syncretism that were happening at this point of time. Now, this was mainly because we see how a lot of religious practices were getting interlinked, especially with the second half of the Roman period. We see how each of the emperors starting to dictate themselves as the rulers, and if they were not following themselves, we see how they were being persecuted. If the emperors are not being worshipped, they are being persecuted, and so on. So there was a lot of religious syncretism that happened at this point of time. Christianity remained as an unlicensed religion. Judaism was a licensed religion, and people were allowed to practice Judaism. However, Christianity remained as an unlicensed religion under them. Also, Christians attacked the pagan cults and the emperor worship, right? They never believed in any of them and firmly stood for it. Maybe attacked is not the right word. However, they openly spoke about it, and also they were not ready to practice any of this, and they were ready to pay for this with their lives. We see how there were a lot of misbeliefs about Christianity that were spreading, especially about Lord's Supper and all, because it happened in a closed atmosphere. It was just restricted to some people. So there were a lot of misbeliefs about Christianity that was floating around at that point of time. And at last, there were unique claims of Christian faith that offended the empire, especially in Paul and all. We see how we have the strong accounts in front of the judges, in front of the kings, in front of these Felix and all of them. They are able to proclaim the truth without diluting any aspect of it. So in that way, we are able to see how these unique claims of Christians kind of offended them at that point of time. So this is at a point of time where the Roman influences at large had its effect on the entire Jewish faith and the place at that point of time. Also, in looking at the high priestly office, now we started off this account in the firstly where we said there were two high priests, right? We see Annas and Caiaphas as two high priests. Now, one of the reasons why we have that is because Annas was a legitimate high priest. However, the Romans had to dismiss him because of a dispute that had happened with them. And they had installed his own son-in-law, Caiaphas, as the high priest. However, so now in the eyes of Romans, Caiaphas is the high priest. So, but Jews refused to recognize the action of the Roman Empire and to take Caiaphas as their high priest. So what happened is they regarded Annas as their official and only legitimate high priest, whereas in the account, we see how Caiaphas was the high priest that point of time. So we see how the offices, and this can, in Mosaic time or in the prophetical time, one can never imagine a government assigning the role of a prophet in a high priestly office, but that's what happened with over time when a lot of these issues that happen. Running through the entire session for today, we see how there was Pompey in the beginning, and then that entire thing went into Augustus, right? And then from Augustus, we see how Herod the Great had a lot of important positions that he played. Herod's children and his downfall we saw, and the various Caesars that we are able to find at that point of time, as well as the impact of Roman rule upon these people and the Roman influences that happened at this point of time. So these are some of the things that we had looked at today, and we will close this session with this many details. So next week, we will come back and we'll be looking at the details of the various sects that arise, as well as we will look at the the final aspect of pseudographical and apocryphal writings that arise from this point of time. So may God bless you all.